Obviously, Hollywood's not here this year, and it's the first time I've been coming to ComicCon since 1996, and I remember the vibe then, and I haven't felt that vibe in a long time. It's not like Hollywood's a bad thing to be here, but they're not really the reason why Comic-Con existed to begin with. It was a celebration of everything we loved as a group, and they kind of came in and changed that. So I really feel like it's back to that. They're not here, but we are still here. Kind of feels great. So thanks for coming. Mobile filmmaking. A little bit about me. My name is Paul Giret. I'm an independent film producer, director, and DP based out of San Diego. I've been doing it for about 20 years. I own a film company called Film for Food. It's here in San Diego. Been doing that for about 10 years. My film credits, I have 19 credits as a producer, 8 credits as a director, 17 credits as a cinematographer, and 33 as an editor. All films that you guys have probably never heard of before. And that doesn't include my credits for music videos and commercial projects as well. If you want to know more about me, you can go to my website at filmforfood.com. That's enough about me, and now the reason why you're here. So it is officially the rise of mobile filmmaking. I actually did this panel 9 years ago when this first kind of came about. I had been given the first 4K cell phone by Motorola with the Snapdragon chip in it, and we had to shoot a short film and put it in a festival. So Comic-Con asked me to come here and do a panel about mobile filmmaking, and I thought I could just use that same slideshow and bring it today, but that is not the case. So much has changed in the past 9 years. Back then, it was like a novelty to shoot a movie on a cell phone, and now it's like legit. The things they can actually do on a cell phone are kind of ridiculous. I'm gonna get into like the best ways to take your mobile device and try it and make it look like a cinema camera. I shoot on a red helium 8K cinema camera, a beautiful camera. And when I was able to actually take a few different cell phones out and compare those side by side. So I do have some video examples, and we'll be able to see some side by sides of how an iPhone 14 Pro and a Google Pixel 7 stand up next to a $30,000 cinema camera. And you'll actually be surprised about the results. And then I'll show you guys the best ways to maximize your mobile device. So best practices in a cell phone, the best things that you can do in order to maximize the capabilities of your mobile device. And then we're gonna get into some third-party gear. There are a bunch of companies that were actually willing to give me all sorts of gizmos and gadgets and all these different cool things that you can plug into your cell phone to actually build it out to be a legitimate cinema rig. So I'll show you the best things that I discovered and all the cool things that I found and was able to test. Then we're gonna get a little bit into post-production. Yes, you can edit on your cell phone, so we will touch on that a little bit, and we'll also talk about visual effects in post-production as well. And I've left a little bit of time for a Q&A session. So moving on to camera settings. Every camera has the same set of settings. There's a lot of different things that your cameras do. Most cameras do the same thing, and this is how it applies to cell phone cameras. So the first thing you want to know is that you need to take control of your cell phone. Cell phones, for the most part, are great for beginners because you can have them and use them, and you usually can get a pretty decent shot no matter what your experience level is. But the downside about that is that it stays in auto mode. It's auto for white balance, auto mode for ISO, auto mode for shutter speed, and that is not how you shoot things cinematically. You want to be able to control it yourself. And in order to control your cell phone camera, you need a third-party app. So aftermarket apps, there's a long list of them. A lot of them boasting that they'll turn your cell phone into a professional camera. Some of them are free, some of them are not. Just go ahead and search inside of your app store and you'll get a long list of different apps that are available for you to download. So I was able to get my hands on Moment Pro and also Filmic Pro. Moment Pro I actually had the opportunity to test out, and I would say that it's definitely a beginner's app that's more focusing on photography in your cell phone. Doesn't mean it doesn't have some cool options for video as well, but it's definitely like beginner's level. So if you're just getting into it, I would suggest trying out Filmic Pro. It's also kind of a low overhead, so if you don't want to invest too much into it, I think it's only $4.99 to buy. And also the new version of it just came out with some pretty cool features in it. So at least check Filmic Pro out. Filmic Pro is hands down the best filmmaking app that exists. There's nothing else like it, bar none. If you're getting serious about mobile filmmaking, look into Filmic Pro. It's not exactly cheap, but it's worth the money, where it's about $4.99 a week or about $60 a year to buy. But if you want to be serious and truly turn your phone into a cinema device and open it up with as many options as you possibly can, then Filmic Pro is definitely the way to go. I'm basically going to be talking about Filmic Pro pretty much every single time I talk about an aftermarket app in all these slides, because there's just nothing else to compare it to, and it really gives you the opportunity to do a lot of really neat things with your phone. So if you're somewhat familiar with video at all or televisions, you know the numbers 720, 1080, 4K, 6K, and 8K. A lot of people toss those numbers around. Resolution is basically the size of your video screen, or how many pixels are on the screen. As always, bigger is better. 8K being one of the highest resolutions that is becoming more common these days. Yes, there are cell phones that shoot in 8K. There's a handful of them out there, which is pretty amazing to have that sort of technology that you can access in your pocket at any given time. So whenever I talk to anyone about what they should capture in for their resolution or anything else when they're shooting, whether it be in a cell phone or anything else, it's always capture at the highest resolution possible, mainly because you can always down res, but you can't up res as easily. You used to not be able to up res, and you could only down res, but now because of AI and the new technology, there's definitely AI up res programs that exist. They're not cheap, but you can definitely find that as a way to take your footage from 1080 to 6K or 8K if you want to pay the cost. But if you don't, and you just want to capture it and then put it on a hard drive and then down res later on, then it's much less expensive to just capture that way, unless you don't have the storage. You want to consider storage anytime you're considering what you're going to shoot in. If you don't have the amount of storage for the amount that you're going to shoot, you should probably capture at a lower resolution, but that's the only time you should do that. We're going to touch on storage a little bit later on. Frame rate, measured in FPS, frames per second. It's the total number of frames that you can fit into a second of video. The standard for frames per second in film is 24 frames per second. Comes from 100 years ago when they started shooting on actual photovoltaic film, and they realized that if you take 24 still images in 1 second, it will replicate motion, which is carried over into the digital world and now into the cell phone world. So if you're shooting a film, keep it at 24 frames per second. If you're shooting a video and commercial, 30 frames per second is definitely much more common. And frame rate also applies to slow motion frame rates being 60, 120, and 240. So 60, 120, and 240 standard for slow motion. And yes, you can shoot that on a cell phone. I did some test shots for some slow motion stuff. And this one comes with a warning, so do not attempt to replicate this shot. Don't do it, it's a bad idea. So you guys know what Jenga is, right? So I figured it'd be cool to see a tower of Jenga fall, but I also decided to set it on fire. Flaming Jenga is not a fun game to play in your garage. Again, don't attempt this, but this gives you a great example of what 240, 120, and 60 frames per second are. It's just, everything looks good in slow motion, even when you're about to burn your garage down. I mean, this is regular Jenga falling. I mean, you don't want to see that. It's ComicCon, you gotta step it up. Like, it's regular Jenga. Bitrate. Bitrate is measured in megabits per second. Megabits per second. It's how much information you can pack into 1 pixel is what megabits are per second of video. Basically, it's how much detail you can put into your shot and how much leeway you have with color and highlights and shadows in post-production. But also, same thing as resolution. If you're shooting at a higher resolution, it's better, but it's also more storage space. Same thing, if you're shooting at a higher megabits per second, you're gonna have a bigger file size. So keep storage in mind for everything that you do. So your bitrate is going to make your storage space go down. So keep storage in mind. Just to know, as like a baseline for what you guys do, think of where your destination for your film is gonna go. If you're shooting a film and it's just gonna end up on YouTube, and that's where you know it's destined for, don't shoot at that high a bitrate if you don't wanna spend storage space. For example, YouTube at 1080 30 frames per second, they're gonna down res it to 8 megabits per second anyway. They condense everything you upload. So if you're shooting at 48, they're gonna bring it down to 8 anyway. So you're pushing the limits and you don't need to. So keep that in mind. It's always something to look into, but if you plan for a theatrical release, you want to submit it to festivals, you're going to make a DCP file out of it, and you really want to pull color out of it and make it as beautiful as possible, just like resolution, shoot it at the highest rate that you possibly can, because there is no upres for bitrate. Shutter speed, twice your frame rate is always a good standard. If you're shooting at 24 frames per second, set it at 48, and 30 frames, 60, pretty standard. And that's because of motion blur. Like, wave your hand in front of your face. There's blur. You can see blur. It's natural motion blur. Motion blur is setting it at twice your frame rate. Set it and forget it. Just leave it alone. ISO or ISO. Your writing digital amplification of brightness is what ISO actually is in the digital realm. It used to be a type of film. Is what kind of film stock you would get. The analogy I like to use for ISO is, think of volume. When you turn up your volume, if you turn it up as high as you can actually get, you get distortion and there's noise. Same thing happens with ISO. You don't want to push your ISO too high, especially on a cell phone, because you're going to get this digital black grain. Black grain is bad. Black grain bad. So don't set your ISO too high, because that's a low quality shot. Won't be able to use it. So keep your ISO as low as you possibly can. If you want a brighter shot, bring a bigger light. Don't pump your ISO up past a certain point, because you want to avoid digital grain, especially in cell phones, because they get grain pretty easily. White balance is something you got to keep in mind always. It's what makes your whites look white. There is no standard. I can't tell you what to constantly set your cell phone for, because it changes in every lighting situation. If you're in a cloudy space, it's going to be more towards the blue. If you're in a room with a lot of incandescent bulbs, it's going to be more towards the red. It's just the nature of light in general. That's the spectrum of light measured in kelvins. The best way to do it, use the auto white balance, have the camera figure out what the white balance is in the room and lock it. Leave it there. So that's the best practice for that. Aperture, a little more sophisticated thing with lenses and shallow depth of field. When it comes to cinema and cinematic shot, are all about the wide aperture on a lens. So the wider aperture you have, the more shallow depth of field you will have. It's just letting more light into your camera. The thing about cell phones is these are your lenses. They have no aperture whatsoever. So how do you control that in a phone? Some of the new phones that are coming out have what's called computational depth of field. So there is depth of field. It's using algorithms and lasers. You ever wonder what these extra little cameras are on the front of your phone? They're lasers that actually scan the depth of things that are in your shot in real time, knowing to keep the subject that's in front of you in focus and everything behind the subject blurred out. And that's what gives you this non-real shallow depth of field. I made a video about computational f-stop. It's about 2 minutes long, so here you go. Computational focal length is a concept used in digital photography to simulate the behavior of a physical camera lens. It represents a virtual focal length that can be adjusted digitally to manipulate the perspective and depth of field in a digital image.
In traditional photography, the focal length of a camera lens determines the angle of view, magnification, and depth of field of the resulting image. The wider the f-stop, the shallower the depth of field. However, in computational photography, where images are captured by digital sensors and processed using software algorithms, the concept of focal length is completely simulated. By manipulating the computational focal length, it is possible to simulate the effect of changing the lens's physical focal length, allowing for various creative effects and control over the image's perspective.
Game changer!
In certain digital setups like the iPhone 14 Pro, a digital video clip that was captured in cinematic mode can have its focal length edited in post-production. I'm going to say that one more time. With certain cell phones, you can edit your focus in post-production. If you don't like what you or the camera chose to have in focus during the shot, simply change the subject you want in focus, or if you want everything to stay in focus, get rid of the shallow depth of field altogether. Computational focal length is hands down the largest innovation in cell phone cinematography, and has brought this technology even more firepower when compared to traditional digital cameras. For the longest time, we have seen cell phones trying to be like cinema cameras. But with the new ability to fix focus in post, we may be seeing the first technology that cinema cameras are going to try and copy from cell phones.
Those are some big words. I mean, that's huge. As an editor who's edited hours and hours and hours and hours of footage, there's two things I cannot fix. Performance and focus, and with this we can fix focus. It almost makes me want to shoot on a cell phone, because I've had to throw away some really good performances because the focus was off and I couldn't fix it. So I'm hoping that eventually cinema cameras will adopt this technology in some way. So picture profile is just like a setting. You need an aftermarket app like Filmic Pro in order to achieve this. I know there are other apps out there in existence that do that. We're going to focus on Filmic Pro. Log V2 is the best picture profile you can put in Filmic Pro, and that's your color profile, but it also opens up the possibility of using LUTs or lookup tables, which is a new thing for cell phones, which is something that was primarily only for cinema cameras. You can design something inside of DaVinci Resolve, save it as a dot cube, and then import it into your cell phone using Filmic Pro. Filmic Pro gives you the ability to switch between several of them to see what the different looks look like. You can burn it into the recorded footage, or you can just have it in your preview monitor and just turn that on and off inside the menu. So you'll be recording in Vlog, and you can go ahead and bring your dot cube into post-production and adjust there. To take it a step further, there's a program called Cinematch. It's not cheap, it's like a $150 plugin for Adobe Premiere or DaVinci Resolve. But if you want to use your cell phone as a legitimate B cam on a production, it lets you record in Vlog, bring it into post-production, drop it into the timeline in Premiere, and it lets you select which camera you were shooting on. In my case, it was an iPhone 14 Pro, what picture profile you were using, Vlog 2, and then what professional camera you were shooting on, the red helium, and whatever picture profile you were recording on that. And it matches the two cameras automatically, which is just kind of crazy considering you're matching a cinema camera to a cell phone camera. So if you guys want to check it out, it's free to download and try out. Okay, let's get into the toys. It's the fun stuff. So what are cages? What are lenses for a cell phone? What are stabilizers? What's audio gear for a cell phone? We're going to dig into lighting, not necessarily like lights in general, but how light affects your cell phone. And then we'll also talk about a couple specialty things that I found that were pretty cool. Cages are the main building block of your cinema rig. On a higher end cinema camera, you're going to have rails that holds most of your aftermarket gear. like your follow focus and your matte box. And then like DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, you have cages where you adapt everything to it. And there's also cages for cell phones. So it's the rig. It's how you build out your camera. It comes with handles, makes it easier to hold. It allows you to hold lenses, microphones, lights if you want to adapt those to it, and batteries. So it has a lot of spots for cold shoes and 1/4" 20 screws. So anything that has that can be adapted to a cage. And then of course you can adapt your cage to a stabilizer device. Lenses. So this is the lens section. My cell phone has 3 different lenses on it. Great. I'm going to tell you why you should only be using one of them and why you should be buying aftermarket lenses. So I have an iPhone 14 Pro. It has 3 different lenses: telephoto, super wide, or ultra wide and wide, standard, 77, 13, and 24 millimeter lens. They all have different sensors on them. You have a standard 24 millimeter, has a much better sensor on it than the 77 or the 13. It also has a better stabilization system on it. So you want to shoot with your 24 millimeter lens as much as possible. Move your body, don't change your lens on your cell phone. So if your subject is far away, don't just switch to your 77 millimeter on your phone, move your body closer. That's also why you want to get a telephoto lens for your camera, because you can put your 77 telephoto lens on your 24 millimeter standard lens that has the best sensor. And that's the main reason why aftermarket lenses exist. The lenses attach to your camera in different ways. There's cases. The one on the screen is one by Moment. Shopmoment.com, super awesome website that has all kinds of things cinema gear wise, but specifically for mobile gear. I was able to test out this Moment stuff, and they have custom cases for whatever phone that you have, and their lenses just kind of screw in, and they're really built well. The picture quality is incredible. Like, it really feels like a professional lens in your hand. Other ways to attach lenses to your camera: there are cages that are universal, so no matter what camera you have, it'll fit whatever lens you put on. There's also magnetic attachments that will hold your lenses, but personally wouldn't really trust that. And then there's clamp-on lenses, which seem to be the most popular type of lens attachment, specifically for like the lower end lenses that are out there. If you're gonna buy something that's cheaper, it's probably going to come with a clamp-on adapter. I'm definitely not knocking those. They're actually kind of cool. So if you just want to test something out and see what looks good on your camera, then, you know, spend a little bit of money and get those. And then if you decide that you like the look of that lens, then invest in a more expensive lens. What does that mean? What does millimeter mean on a lens? So here's an example of a bunch of different focal lengths of a camera, and you can see how distorted this young lady is in a fisheye lens, and then how the lens makes her appearance more flattering as you move up in millimeter length. I personally don't recommend shooting with a telephoto lens, especially in video or film. So something good in between that's flattering but also practical in video purposes is something like a 50 or a 70 millimeter lens. You can definitely shoot with lenses that have a higher millimeter, but make sure you have a separate person to pull focus for you, and they're good at it. And it's definitely going to be shaky, so make sure you have a really good tripod too. The coolest lens that I found was the blue anamorphic lens by Filmic Pro. It's actually really cool stuff. Not sure if you guys all know what anamorphic lenses are, but it gives you that squeezed look with the bars on the top and the bottom, and then that very common blue horizontal lens flare. So there are actually cell phone lenses that give you that, and apps like Filmic Pro that actually do the 133 squeeze live while you're recording, so you don't have to do that adjustment in post. Lens filters work the same way on cell phones as they do for anything else. ND filters are like sunglasses for your phone. So instead of adjusting light and dark using the controls on the camera, you just either choose the right filter or get a variable ND filter and darken your shot that way. CPL filters exist. They lower reflections, so if you're shooting into water or through like the window of a car, you can knock down reflections that way. And then there's a plethora of specialty filters out there, like ones that you put on your camera at night. So if you're shooting towards some street lights or whatever lights that are in the background, they'll give it like a star pattern or a specific kind of look. Stabilizers, all kinds of stabilizers exist. You are a stabilizer. You can shoot handheld, there's gimbals, there's tripods, there's sliders, there's also using your imagination. With cell phones, that's the cool thing about them, is that they are small and you can put them in all kinds of places that most cameras can't fit. So I encourage you guys to use your imagination as much as possible to find cool spots where you can put your cell phone that most cameras can't fit, instead of trying to hide the fact that you're using a cell phone. Emphasize it. So handheld, so there's basically a 3-axis gimbal already built into each one of your lenses. And in real time, it reads your movement on the X, Y, and Z axis and responds accordingly to stabilize the shot. And then there's even more sophisticated things if you're doing action scenes, fight scenes, chase scenes, whatever it may be. If your camera is shaking a lot, there's actually action mode that exists on some of the newer cameras, and I made a little video about that. So
Action video mode is a specialized cell phone shooting mode designed to capture fast-moving subjects or action-packed scenes with optimal clarity and smoothness. This mode typically employs a combination of settings to enhance the quality of videos taken in high-speed scenarios. Some features you might find in action video mode are enhanced image stabilization, higher frame rates, faster autofocus, and predictive algorithms. Specific capabilities of action video mode vary between different cell phone models. I tested the iPhone 14 Pro and a Google Pixel 7 to see how they handled a running subject. The Pixel 7 did a good job and held the subject in frame, and it came out pretty smooth. Although the iPhone 14 was not perfect, it was definitely more visibly stable than the Pixel 7. Clean, stable shots in action-packed scenarios without the use of a stabilization device gives cell phone filmmakers yet another tool to have ready to go in their pocket.
Gimbal is a device that reads your movements on the X, Y, and Z axis, just like the gimbal on your camera, except it's on a larger scale and very smooth. It also has controls with your thumb, so you can pan and tilt smoothly. And you got to do this thing called the ninja walk when you walk, so that when you're walking with it, it doesn't actually see your footsteps. And gimbals are a great tool, and you can find pretty good ones for under a $200 price tag. I consider this a great investment if you're going to be shooting on a cell phone, especially if your piece has a lot of movement. And one thing to keep in mind is you want to turn off the stabilizer inside your phone if you're going to be using a gimbal, because they kind of counteract each other. And the gimbal balance is much better than the one inside of your phone. This is an essential piece of gear if you are a cell phone filmmaker. Get yourself a tripod mount. It's got a 1/4" 20 screw on the bottom of it. The best one I found is the MOVO tripod mount, mainly because it has this rubber material on it and kind of a screw on the back of it that allows you to tighten it and not damage your phone. And you can lock everything in. It fits most phones, and it already has 1/4" 20 screws built into the side of it, so you don't even really need a cage with this thing. You can just attach a couple things if that's what you have. It comes as part of this iVlog kit with all these other things, so you can kind of build your own kit. It's a good starting point to use this thing. Slider is hands down the tool that I abuse when I'm shooting a movie. I try and fit a slider into pretty much every scene. I use Dana Dolly when I'm using my red, but the one you're seeing here will work beautifully if you're using it on a cell phone. You can find them relatively inexpensive for under $200, and you can attach your cell phone tripod mount to it on the 1/4" 20 screw on the bottom, and then slide left to right and get some beautiful clean shots. We can't talk about the video aspect of things without talking about the audio side of things, because that is a huge part of it. We won't get into it too deep because we could have an entire panel and then some about audio. So I'll touch on it real quick and how it applies to cell phones. The number one thing you should be asking yourself when shooting a scene is there dialogue or is there no dialogue? If it does have dialogue, then you need to think seriously about how you're going to capture that dialogue. So the best way to do that is to lav your people, to use a lavalier microphone, preferably wirelessly. And then you can plug that directly into your cell phone. Also, having a boom on set is very important. There is this device, which is made by Zacuto. It's called the micro boom, that attaches to the cage of your cell phone and kind of booms out over your talent so that the microphone gets closer to them. Onboard shotgun mic is great, but if it's not close to your actors, then you're not going to be capturing good sound. So you want to get the microphone as close to your actors' mouths as possible. Having a dedicated sound person is bar none the best way to capture sound on set, especially if you have dialogue. So just like if you were shooting any other movie, have a sound person capture your sound separately and make sure you slate every shot and then sync it up in post-production. And there is Jam Sync in the Filmic Pro app, so if you guys want to dig into that, if you do know what that means, there is Jam Sync on cell phones. And if there is no dialogue, if that is the answer to your question, then you can build the sound, either capturing the sound in the environment that you're shooting in, or just having access to a sound library on the internet and using the sounds that you download and add into your sound design. Also, if you are just using your cell phone, and I can't escape these things that keep popping up. This is incredible. Just play with this. It's free. It's made by Adobe. It's Adobe's Enhanced Speech AI. You just drag and drop your audio file into this free website and it gets rid of a lot of the background noise, and it actually does a really good job. I'm not going to say shoot with no audio person because this exists and like use your onboard microphone, but if you have nothing else, this is a good way to go about it to clean up your audio. So capture the best audio you can, but if you don't have anything else, run it through this. It's free. Now here's a video about my cell phone filmmaking setup. My cinema phone setup. An iPhone 14 Pro with the most current version of the Filmic Pro app installed, with the major foundation of the setup being the Zacuto Z Finder. On top of the Z Finder, I have attached a MOVO remote shutter, so I can start and stop recording without having to reach for my screen. Attached to the Zacuto accessory rod is a MOVO LED XS for additional light when needed. My audio setup includes a Sennheiser wireless lav and receiver, as well as a MOVO VXR10 Pro shotgun mic that both plug into a Saramonic SmartRig 2-channel mixer, running into a MOVO IM8 audio adapter that, when plugged in, is automatically recognized by Filmic Pro as my audio source. My lens of choice is made by Moment, starting with the Moment iPhone 14 Pro case, drop-in lens mount, and the Blue Flare anamorphic lens with the 1.33 adapter applied in Filmic Pro. For a more simple setup, I stripped down most of the gear to the essentials and attached the rig to a Moment MagSafe tripod mount. And if nothing else, I had a lot of fun playing with that stuff. Now we're going to touch on this little gem about this panel. How does a smartphone hold up next to a cinema camera? And so I took it out to Balboa Park in San Diego, kind of just ran these test shots and shot side by side, and with a Google Pixel 7, an iPhone 14 Pro versus a red helium. So this is the lighting section of everything. I'm not going to talk about lights and what lights you should use. We're going to talk about dynamic range for the most part, and I'm going to talk about if you should shoot in low light with a cell phone camera. The easiest way to do this was to make another video. What's up guys, Paul Giret, filmforfood.tv, and I'm here to do a test with the Google Pixel 7, the iPhone 14 Pro, and compare it to a red helium.
Half the montage that just played was shot with a cell phone, and the other half was shot with a $30,000 RED camera. Were you able to tell the difference? This is because there are certain ways to use lighting to make sure that your smartphone camera shots look like they were shot on a cinema camera. The only reason why that montage works is because the cell phone shots were done in perfect filming conditions for a cell phone. A RED camera costs what it costs because it works flawlessly in every element. If the cell phone is not in its perfect element, it starts to look like cell phone footage. You just need to know its exact limitations. Do not shoot in low light situations. This has to do with sensor size. The RED having a 35mm sensor and the cell phone having a sensor about the size of your pinky nail. If your camera has a larger sensor, it's able to capture more detail and do much better in low light. So avoid low light situations because your smartphone footage will automatically start to look very amateur. Dynamic range is how much detail your camera can see in the shadows and the highlights at the exact same time. The RED has fantastic dynamic range. Cell phones do not. To have blown out highlights just screams amateur and cheap camera. When shooting outside, the best time to shoot would be during golden hour. If you try to film any other time, you're going to run into issues with dynamic range. Expose for the highlights instead of the shadows. It's better to be a little dark than to have overexposed highlights. By avoiding low light and knowing the limitations of our dynamic range, you will be able to create higher quality shots by avoiding places that the phone sensor just can't handle and get the most cinematic look for what we have in our pocket.
You guys are better now, huh? Because you watched that. I mean, yeah, underwater capabilities of a cell phone. Like with the newer phones, you just kind of dive in. If you're using a cinema camera, you still need a waterproof casing to put it in that costs thousands and thousands of dollars if you're going to shoot underwater. And with a cell phone, you just hop right into the pool, get in the water and just get a bunch of shots and walk out and make a phone call. It's kind of cool. So a pretty cool aspect of cell phone filmmaking. Don't be afraid. You might want to check with your manufacturer to see if it can be held underwater, but yeah, it's pretty neat. So there's specialty things out there for the gizmos and gadgets. There's a time-lapse timer. That's like an old egg timer that you put your cell phone tripod mount on, and it turns just a normal time-lapse into a much higher production value time-lapse because it gives you like a 180-degree panoramic view. They're only like $10 on Amazon. And bar none, the coolest thing that I found was this Zacuto Z-Finder. That was just a Kickstarter, a successful Kickstarter that happened a couple months back. They were nice enough to provide me with one. I took it out and tested it. I'm not shooting a cell phone project ever again without this. And I'll tell you what, that's the QR code. You guys can scan it, check out their website. They have a plethora of really cool stuff for filmmaking tools for mobile devices. There's nothing else like this by any manufacturer whatsoever. And what it does, it reduces the glare. So on your cell phone, you don't have an eyepiece. You are stuck using your cell phone and your screen to see the image. And that's not the best way to see your image. You need a viewfinder. So this is the viewfinder. It blocks out all the light pollution and the glares and gives you the opportunity to actually see what your camera is recording. So it's really cool. Even has the hole on the bottom, so you can still stick your finger in and control it. I mean, they thought of everything, including, you guys know what a diopter is? For the old school people out there who actually use the viewfinders in cinematography, you can switch out your diopter. If you have like prescription lenses or whatever, you can actually see with your prescription through this thing. You can buy specific diopters to your prescription. Like, they thought of everything. Oh yeah, the Zacuto Z-Finder, way cool. A little bit about shooting best practices, and I'm not going to get too much into it because this is about cell phones. This applies, and I can't say it enough, but as a filmmaker who's been through it many, many times, number one thing, the best tool you have to shooting any movie or any video project is planning. Plan as much as you can. Break down your script 3 or 4 times. Do whatever you can to think through your film. Have plan A, B, and C before you get there on set and your camera's up. Plan it, because the best filmmakers plan. And the biggest difference between higher budget things and things you're just doing with your friends is actually how much planning goes into it. I'm not saying don't go out with your friends on a weekend and make something, but if you want to make something really good, put a lot of thought into it. That's the number one tool that you guys have, and it's free. Now back into everything else. I'll get off my soapbox. Shooting, think of composition. Composition's huge. Look at your shots. See if it's aesthetically pleasing. Remove things from the background. Put a little extra effort into it and you'll see the difference in your final result. Incorporate movement into your shots. Movement is gold when it comes to cinematography. Move your body, do whatever you can, even if it's just handheld. Slide back and forth. Put things in the foreground. Move from a plant to your scene, and it's just going to step up your cinematography game. And take advantage of the phone's size. I can't say that enough. The phone's small. Don't hide that fact that you're shooting on a cell phone. Emphasize the fact that you're shooting on a cell phone. It's here, and you need to show off the fact that you can get cool shots like, oh, they must have shot this on a cell phone. That looks good. So continue to push those boundaries. So get creative, get creative, get creative. I got creative, and I made a little video of what you can do with a cell phone. Some of that I stole from other creators out there, and hopefully it inspired you guys to do the same thing. Let's talk a bit. Let's get back into the technical nuts and bolts of things. File management, something to keep in mind when you're shooting any movie, which also includes when you're shooting on a cell phone. You're stuck with this thing. There is no SD card, at least not yet. So in the meantime, you can't just switch cards and hand your card to your DIT and dump the footage while you're shooting your next scene. You're stuck with it being in here, so how do you get it off? There are aftermarket apps that you can use. So as soon as you stop recording, you can start uploading if you are in a place that has good Wi-Fi. So while you're shooting, the file you just shot uploads to a cloud, and then when you're done shooting a scene, you can just delete everything off your phone. Definitely make sure to check to see if your file's uploaded for sure before you do that, but that is one way to do it. There's also, you can totally dump to an external hard drive between scenes, but you're gonna have to wait, especially if you're shooting with bigger file sizes, because these things don't have a very fast transfer speed. So it might take a little while to get off of your phone. So if you're shooting in ProRes 444, plan on not taking a little while. And if that is the case, plan on having two of the same phones on set. So while one's dumping, you still can be shooting on the other phone. There's also AirDrop, which is incredibly fast. So if you have another Apple device nearby, just AirDrop your files to the other device between shooting scenes. And power. Very important. Definitely make sure you have charged batteries on anything that you do, but in terms of the cell phone situation, like everything is here. So if this battery dies, everything stops. If you do have access to a plug your phone in, leave it plugged in the entire time you're shooting. Keep your phone at 100%. Don't wait for it to get to down to 50% and charge it. Keep it plugged in. Bring these battery banks, keep them charged up, bring as many of them as you possibly can. There are attachments that will attach to a camera cage to hold it for you. Don't consider the battery in your phone to be your battery. Consider these to be your battery. Keep your phone charged, because if it dies, so does your production.
Post-production. I'm not going to talk too much about this, although it is my favorite thing. I could go on for days about post-production. I love editing. It's definitely my passion. But in terms of cell phones, it's a really cool thing because the thing that you shoot on is also the thing that you can edit on. There are plenty of apps out there. Just pick which one you want to use. If you want to just shoot and edit something on your phone, you totally can. But of course, if you want to edit on your computer, just dump your cell phone footage onto a hard drive and plug that in and edit on your computer. It works just like any other footage. My preferred program is Adobe Rush on the cell phone, which pairs with Adobe Premiere. I may be biased because I've been in Premiere for 15 years. But on the mobile device, you can edit on your mobile device in Adobe Rush, and then with the click of a button, you can jump on your computer, and you'll have the same exact timeline with the same edits in Adobe Premiere, and then you can click a button again, and then go back to Adobe Rush and go back and forth between your mobile device and your home computer. You can just do all your assistant editing work on your phone while you're waiting in line at ComicCon for whatever panel you want to watch. And then just go home and finish off the polished edit on your computer if you want. So VFX, I'm not going to dig too deep into VFX on the cell phone. So I've been in After Effects for 15 years, and I can definitely say that using cell phone footage works no differently than using any other footage out of a camera. Just keep in mind when you're doing special effects shots, shoot at the highest resolution you possibly can, especially like 444 if you're going to be doing green screen stuff, because you want all the detail in the pixels that you can possibly get. There's also a plethora of in-camera apps that exist that are out there. Pay for them, you can just do these cool little effects, often in real time. I'm not going to tell you guys which programs work the best or whatever, there's so many of them out there. So do your own research and pick whichever one works for your whatever application you're trying to use it for. And then you can do the effects in camera. So once you're done making your masterpiece, there are so many mobile phone focused film festivals out there that are designed just for cell phone films. It's pretty tough to get into festivals these days. There's so much content being made. So try and focus on as many specialty festivals as possible. So this is just a small list that I have on this slide, but there's so many of them out there, including the International Mobile Film Festival, which is here in San Diego. That just happened last month. It's a great one to try to get into, especially if you're local here in San Diego or Southern California. And there's a lot of them that are out there, and you'll have an advantage because you shot it on a cell phone and you're trying to get into a cell phone film festival. So I wish you guys the best of luck trying to get into whatever festival you submit to. And that's all I have. I know that was a lot. I do have an Instagram and a website, so feel free to follow me. But yeah, that's our slideshow.